Well, here we are again. Third time's a charm, right? Can't believe this. I'm making another video about how to fix the Blood Death Knight in World of Warcraft. It was one of the first videos I ever made, and then I made a second one years later. Blood Death Knight seems to constantly be in a state of trying to keep up, not just in damage, but in its mitigation, especially as we have Mythic Plus now, which is one of the most, done pieces of content in World of Warcraft, where Death Knight seems to fall behind. So as history repeats and repeats and repeats, in this video I'm going to present a solution that'll fix Blood Death Knight. Let's move forward.
I am Raziel.
So as a quick background check before we get into it, I want you to let you know that this channel originally started as a World of Warcraft channel, then later shifted into a Final Fantasy XIV channel, and now overall is a gaming/MMO channel. But one of my first videos I ever did was the Blood Death Knight balance video. And, I do want to point out that I've been playing a Blood Death Knight as a main since Cataclysm, and I mained Death Knight overall since Wrath of the Lich King when they first were released. And I've been tanking the vast majority of my time in World of Warcraft. And in fact, this season right now, we're in Season 3 of The War Within, is the first time I've not mained Blood Death Knight. I'm maining Frost Death Knight right now because the changes, I think, were overall good and I'm enjoying it. But tanking is where my heart is at, and I would like to see Blood Death Knight fixed. So we're going to go into what is causing Blood Death Knight to fall behind, especially when we're talking about Mythic Plus and what can be done to fix it. So going over, what is the Blood Death Knight's biggest problem, its biggest hangup? Now, Blood Death Knight does fairly well, and I would say above average in rating. Rating is not really an issue. Where Blood Death Knight really runs into issues is in Mythic Plus, higher keys, anything above a 10, they can start to struggle. Why? Because Blood Death Knights are one of the only tanks that is purely reactive in its mitigation, which means that you need to get hit in order to then mitigate the damage that you took. The problem is, what if the hits that you take one-shot you, which becomes more and more common as the higher key you go up. Other tanks don't have to deal with this as much because they have, like, for example, Druids have the highest armor in the game. Demon Hunter has, spikes that can keep them in a constant state of DR on top of having a higher dodge than, say, a Death Knight or a Warrior, because they have high agility. Then you have Warriors and Paladins who passively block things, and of course you have the stagger mechanic with the Monk. There's all these things that prevent them from getting one shot where Death Knight doesn't have it. Now, another big problem with Death Knight is we do have a few oh shit buttons, such as, Icebound Fortitude, but there's not a lot we can do outside of, that. Unless we spec into it, which the talent builds right now just don't favor doing that. There's a lot of useless talents in the Blood Tree. But another huge issue we have is our mastery. Blood Death Knight's mastery, Blood Shield, is pretty shit. It's pretty useless, and it has been since it was nerfed into the ground at the end of Mists of Pandaria, and it hasn't really been that great since. It just doesn't provide, like, a huge Blood Shield, which is hard to maintain at all because how much damage you take just deletes it. Even if you get a sizable Blood Shield, it's gone in 1 or 2 melee attacks from regular mobs or 1 attack from a boss. So it's kind of useless overall. Of course, the nerfs to how Deathstrike works in the beginning of the War Within didn't help. I don't think that's the core of the issue. I think the core of the issue is this, that Blood Death Knights are too reactive. All the other tank specs in the game have a lot of passive mitigation up front, while Death Knights do not. Outside of Icebound Fortitude and Rune Tap, if you take it, which I'm going to say later in the video, might as well say it now, I think Rune Tap should just be removed from the game. It's a trap talent. I believe that we can fix this while keeping Blood Death Knight's reactivity having the most reactive mitigation, the most control over our health pool, and Deathstrike being our primal way of healing back damage. We can keep that intact, and we can fix it very easily. But before I go into my solution, we need to have one thing clear. There are a lot of stats in World of Warcraft that are boring. I think, for example, versatility should no longer be anything but a PvP stat. It's a very boring stat. It does the same thing for every class. Crit, while not as boring, still does the same thing for every class and spec. Increases your chance to crit. The most interesting stat in the game, in my opinion, is mastery, because it does something different for every class and every spec in the game. And I think mastery should be the most important spec. Not spec, excuse me, the most important stat. And I think that mastery is specifically Blood Death Knight's mastery is terrible, making the blood shield. So how can we tie in mastery and fix the issue? And here's how. First and foremost, I would get rid of blood shield as our mastery. It's fine that it increases attack power as well. We can keep that, but there's something else I would have it do. Let's look at bone shield. The primary way we keep our armor up, and every time we get hit, it loses a charge. There are several abilities you can use, such as Tombstone, Bone Storm, that remove, some of your stacks. I think it's ultimately important to focus on what Bone Shield can do and how it can change to fix this issue very simply. Here's my proposal. Bone Shield now grants a stacking damage reduction per charge. And I think mastery should play into this. And this damage reduction should be all damage, physical and magical. And we can do this without breaking the game or making, the Death Knight unkillable very simply. First and foremost, let's make it so, let's say your character has 0% mastery. So what that would mean is somewhere between 0.5 to 0.75% damage reduction per bone shield charge at 0 mastery. As you stack mastery, that goes up, of course, with diminishing returns and having a cap. And the cap could be, obviously there'd be some balancing things here, but 2% to 2.5% is the cap per stack total. That way, a brand new Blood Decay with almost no mastery is getting at least, 5% damage mitigation as long as they have Bone Shield up. Just passively, everything. And obviously every time you lose a stack, and it still keeps the gameplay in where you have to keep your stacks high. Then if you stack mastery, you can go the route of eventually getting up to 25%, 20 to 25% total DR all the time, as long as you have a Bone Shield up. And this is fine because it ties into Rune Tap, the same percentage amount as Rune Tap, prevents one-shots, still keeps in that you need to self-heal when you get hit, still keeps in the fact that, your mastery still provides you attack power, still keeps in the armor effect of keeping your stacks up. You want high armor because if you have no Bone Shield charges, not only is your armor low, but you're taking, it's complete unmitigated damage. This would fix the issue and would make mastery a very important stat again. And I think, once again, versatility should just not be a stat that I think any class really focuses on. It's so boring. Just a flat, small percent damage reduction and damage done. I think versatility belongs in PvP, and because it's really not a lot different than the old resilience stat that was for PvP that they removed. And then you could add like a new talent, for example. We can reiterate on all of this. We could add a new talent such as, Vampiric Fortitude. Heart Strike and Blood Boil have like a 10 or a 15% chance to generate an additional Bone Shield, but Death Strike now consumes one Bone Shield and increases its healing by 10% when you do it, when you take this talent. There are things like that you could do to make it, far more interesting. And we still have to juggle resources, runes, and Bone Shield stacks, right? And our Death Strike window. So I think that would be the most easy solution that Blizzard could do to fix Blood Death Knight's viability going into high Mythic Plus keys. It doesn't change our gameplay too drastically. It keeps us the most reactive. So those are my thoughts on the Blood DK, and obviously there's going to be so many other things. But now let's talk about DK overall, because I think this is important too. There's been a lot of discussion on, the forums and whatnot about Blizzard's stupid brain-dead decision to consider grips a raid buff, which they absolutely are not. Things like grip, Gorfine's Grasp, AMZ, they're not raid buffs. I don't understand why Blizzard doesn't do the following. We need to bring back auras as a raid buff, okay? And I get why there's a possibility that if you gave every spec, 3 different auras like we had back in Wrath of Lich King, that it would then force, the top 1% to bring 3 Death Knights to every single raid, which I agree isn't something that they should feel forced to do. But I think auras need to come back. If you just bring one back for a raid buff, I would say, or just two, I would say at least bring back Unholy Aura and, Frost Presence, because, Frost maybe adds 2 to 3% crit to the entire raid. Unholy Aura brings, 2 to 3% haste to the entire raid. Or you could just do and have a Blood Aura if they wanted to do all three, which does 3% leech to the 2 to 3% leech to the entire raid. There's so many things you could do to bring that. And if Blizzard really wants to die on the hill of grips or utility, then the only way I can see that even kind of being acceptable is with the removal of Slappy Hands. We now need to move Gorfine's Grasp out of the Blood Tree, and I would say put it into the Death Knight class tree. All Death Knights should have access to Gorfine's Grasp, and then maybe just Blood has an additional talent that reduces its cooldown and does something like every enemy, pulled in by Gorfine's Grasp does 6% less damage to you for 10 seconds, something like that. They make it more viable as a Blood Death Knight choice, but I don't think it should be straight up baseline, but I think it should be in the class talent tree, not the Blood talent tree. If they're truly going to say grips are the raid buff, right? Which I don't agree with, but hey, if they're gonna die on that hill, that's what we should do. I mean, there are so many talents, as I mentioned earlier, and a lot of the traits need to be removed. For example, I think Unholy Death Knight needs a complete rework where it's just pet/disease focus. I think Festering Wounds need to go away completely, but that's a whole other video. Anyway, guys, I just want to know what your thoughts and feelings are about my proposed Blood Death Knight changes to our mastery and to how Bone Shield works. Comments down below if you think this is something you agree with. Share it around, get people to see it, maybe Blizzard to see it. I do know some people at Blizzard saw my very first one that I did way back in the day because some of those changes went through, and a friend I know that does know Blizzard say someone saw it. An employee at Blizzard said that they looked at it, but who knows? Who knows what's going to happen? I love tanking. I love the Death Knight class. I've mained it. I will continue to main it no matter how shit or good it is. Gone through all the highs and lows. But yeah, guys, thoughts and opinions below on these proposed changes. Obviously, there's a lot of other things we could do that are far more convoluted, but I think this is the simplest way to just fix the issue. Anyway, guys, comments down below. As always, take care, my friends. Keep it real.